I have that spelling right. Okay, I'd like to speak on how Artemis died, and Artemis the goddess died, how she died. Uh, she was trying to prevent the war of Troy from happening to protect the Trojans, and her brother, Apollo, the sun god, who was living in the temple on the beaches of Troy. So the Apollo, the sun god, was living on the beaches of Troy as a protective presence to ward off all invaders of even thinking about it. So nobody messed with Troy because Apollo, the sun god, lived on the beach, and a temple of Apollo was at Troy, and the god himself lived in that temple. Actually, the god Apollo lived in that temple. Actually, I did not make any mistakes in what I just said. Artemis, for some things she did and ended up dead. And so I'm going to talk about how Artemis, the goddess, ended up dead before the War of Troy ever happened. So when high priest of Artemis, his sister Cassandra was a high priest of Apollo. Helenus was a high priest of Helenus. How could Helenus be a high priest of Helenus? If Artemis is dead, then Helenus can only be a high priest of the divine feminine collective, which is all that's left of a dead goddess when she died. All that was left of her was the divine feminine collective of all the women in the world in that time, in Troy and everywhere else, that followed her, that were recognizing her as their goddess. Helenus was not a high priest of Helenus himself, unless Artemis was dead. And then Helenus could have been a high priest of Apollo, her brother, the sun god. And if he was dead also, then how could Helenus be a high priest of only Helenus now? Because if Apollo and Artemis were both dead, then there was no god or goddess to be high priest of left, except to say that all the Trojan men in the divine masculine collective of Troy, in fact, the Trojan men themselves, who were also under Zeus and Mars, Apollo, and even other gods and goddesses, how is it possible that Helenus ended up being a high priest of himself only and trying to carry out those duties? To think that Helenus could be a high priest of only himself is just a fact when you consider that he was not the high priest of Zeus in particular, but the high priest of his children. And the duties which involved being a high priest to Apollo or Artemis, who were real gods and goddesses, or a real god and a real goddess that actually that were alive at one time before there was only one god. There were more than one god. And before there was only one God, there were many gods and goddesses, which were actually real and alive in the world. When there became to be one God, and he was the only one God there is, well, I'll tell you that the only thing that comes to mind is Jehovah and Zeus as who he could be. Because I don't think he could be anyone else. If there's only one God, he's going to be coming to the name Zeus or Jehovah, Yahweh, which also will describe his son. And so it's Yahweh truly will be not the two names, Zeus or Jehovah or Jupiter. If Helenus is high priest of God, the one God that there is, then Helenus is not a high priest of Helenus. And if Helenus is a high priest of Helenus, it's because Apollo, the sun god, is dead, but it's not truly because Apollo, the sun god, is dead. It's truly because Artemis, the goddess, her brother, is dead. Helenus could not be a high priest of Helenus if he's the high priest of Artemis or the high priest of Apollo. And if Artemis and Apollo are dead, then Helenus is only going to be a high priest of Helenus. And it will be a truth that he'll discover that there is no way else to do it, because however he does it, attempting to be worshiping a dead god or goddess, it truly will be that Helenus is really being high priest of Helenus and then trying to remember to honor a memory, which is not really a god or goddess that's living or alive, but they are both dead. If Helenus is the high priest of Zeus, he's not the high priest of Helenus. And if Helenus is the high priest of Apollo, well, first he's the high priest of Artemis, his sister, who is his sister, and his sister who is him. And there is no difference, as twins will be twins, and the two is one. As Helenus was the brother and twin brother of Cassandra, they were also twins. So the twins, Cassandra and Helenus, were twins. And Cassandra was the high priestess of Apollo, the sun god, and Helenus was her brother, her twin brother, who was the high priest of Artemis. She would say goddess of the hearth, which is not true, and she's known by the term goddess of the hunt, which is true, and also not true if she changes, she doesn't hunt anymore. She wouldn't be considered the goddess of the hunt if she doesn't hunt anymore. So she might be seen as the goddess of the hearth if she's not hunting anymore, but she's still the goddess of the hunt in the sense of the memory of what she once was. And she still is what she once was. And she still is alive in the collective, but not as a goddess anymore, actually. Which means that if Artemis was destroyed, killed by Zeus, and who says that he would tell you that she killed herself, it was her own doing. So anyone that says I killed her is not true. She killed herself. It was her fault. She did it. So ultimately, if anyone says that I did it, it's not true that I did it. She did it. So Zeus would only be saying that the way he sees it is that she killed herself, and the way that she would see it as he killed her. So we're only saying that in Helenus's viewpoint, looking at what he thinks happened. Well, if he is actually a high priest of himself and only himself, due to the fact that she's dead and so is Apollo, and the fact that he's not a high priest of Zeus, the one God that is, well, it's only a truth to be reckoned with and acknowledged, that he's not the high priest of the one God that is, and he's not supposed to be. He's also not supposed to be the high priest of himself, but since his God and goddess are dead, there's only himself left, and he is himself, and he is left. He's also right that he's been left behind as a reoccurring self that comes back and ultimately forever comes back over and over, never to know who he is or isn't, what he is or why he is, but he will likely never know. Coming back forever, Helenus will not be dead forever. He will die forever and be reborn over and over forever. And so he's not truly not having eternal life. He's truly not having eternal death, since eternal life is eternal death. Since we come back over and over, we're born over and over, so we get to live over and over, and that is eternal life. And we get to die over and over, and this is eternal death. So this is also eternal life. if it actually is both, because it needs to be both if it's going to actually get to live. And if it's the wrong one first, it needs to be the right one first. And if it's the right one first, it might be the wrong one. So if it is the right one and it's the right one first, it'll be the left one first, and then it'll be in the name of the right one, the left one first. And that's how it works, because there are two deities that are dead. And Helenus is not a priest, a high priest of himself, unless his god and goddess are dead. And he's certainly not a high priest of Zeus, because Zeus is the only god that's left and the one god that's right. And Zeus is not having a high priest that's called Helenus, but Helenus would never not do his will or go against him, because Helenus would never go against the will of God or the one God. But Helenus doesn't follow the one God or do his will. Helenus tries to do the will of Artemis and Apollo, who are dead. He doesn't realize that he'll do the will of himself in the fact that they're dead. He can't be a god. He can't be a god or goddess, or even a high priest of a god or goddess who's dead, or even himself, who lives over and over and dies over and over. So is dead and both alive and living, and dead over and over, dying over and over. If the one God, who is the one God, who is the only God, and there are no gods or goddesses next to him that are at least living anymore, there's only one God left. If there's only one God, and it's true, there is only one God left, and he's right. Understand, if he is right, he's the only one left, then he is right. If he is the only one left, then he is right. And if he can't be both a god and a goddess, because the one God that is not a goddess, he's a god only, then he'd have to be thought to be a god that was not a goddess, because he's the father of all the gods and goddesses. He's not a goddess. He's a god that's a father to all the gods and goddesses, and they're all dead. And he's not dead. So that the one God that is alive and not dead is the father of all the gods and goddesses who are all dead and not alive. Not anymore. If we have one God, it doesn't mean that we didn't have goddesses before, or that there weren't other gods too, like the Son of God, who's alive today. And understand, if he's not alive today, then we're worshiping his memory in honor of his memory, that he once was alive before he died on the cross and died after, and was dead. So then he was dead after he died on the cross. And if he came back and he was resurrected, and so that he did die on the cross, but then he was reborn, but it was not reborn, it was actually resurrected. So he came back in the same body he lost and gained it back, rather than a new body, which he lost and has to find a new one. So it doesn't actually get it back. So the resurrection of Christ means the Son of God that is alive, because he did die, so he was not alive, but then he came back to life, and he is alive because he is his dad. He's also his mom. But his mom is not alive as a goddess, because she is only known now as what we have in the Trinity, and it can be seen as put the two and two together, so I don't need to discuss it further. The two and two together are not four. They're one and one, which are two, and it's one now, which means it's not two anymore when it becomes one. And if it becomes one, it's not the one God, because the one God is not made of two things or becoming one thing from two things. The one God is only one thing and not the other thing. And if it's also the other thing, it's not the one thing. If it can switch back and forth, it truly will not be both, even if it is. As the bird flies, you're flying in the right direction, although you may not be going where you want to go to or where you want to stay at once you arrive, you are flying in the right direction. And at least it's the right direction, so that although you're not finding the spot where you think that you need to land and want to be, you're actually feeling that you're not able to find the spot where you want to land and want to be, because all you're doing is flying in the right direction. You're not finding where you want to be, and you're not flying to where you want to find you want to be. You're not able to find where you want to be because wherever you're flying to is only in the right direction. It's not actually flying to a destination which can be arrived at. Flying in the right direction means that you're not flying in the wrong direction. Flying in the wrong direction is futile to anything you're doing, including flying itself. And if you're flying in the right direction, if it feels futile that you're flying forever and never being able to rest, it's because you're at least flying in the right direction that you should be prompted to continue to fly, no matter how much of a waste of time it seems. If it's in the right direction, it's at least in the right direction. If you are not able to find the spot you need to land at and your destination because you're only flying in the right direction forever, you'll never find the right spot and the right destination or the place you're left at when you're right there, here. And it is right. And it is left behind or leaving itself to a destiny of flying in the right direction, which will never lead anywhere to where its result is or its final destination. So flying in the right direction will get you nowhere and lead you just as far to be wasted and waste your time as flying in the wrong direction, which is only more truly obvious that if you're flying in the wrong direction, it's completely a waste of time and it's really an obvious thing. And if you're flying in the right direction, the fact that you'll be doing it forever and not ever getting to any place is only what you'll realize when you realize how futile it is to have hope when it's hopeless. I will not find where I'm going to be or land in any place which I want to be or need to be. In the end, when I'm flying in the right direction forever, it's not the right direction forever, because if it is the right direction forever, it's only in the right direction and not going to where it needs to be and not staying at where it needs to stay. And it won't know where it needs to stay until it gets there. And only when it gets there will it decide to stay or not. And while it's going there, it'll never be there. And so it can't stay. If it finds a place where it can stay, it'll be okay that it finds a place where it could stay. If it's going to be that it finds a place that it can stay, it will be because it's not flying in the right direction, but directly to where it needs to be. And it's not the right direction it'll be flying in. It'll be actually flying right where it needs to be. And it won't be in a general direction. It'll be a specific azimuth point on a specific degree of the compass. It won't be a general right direction. It won't be something general, and it won't be something that can not be arrived at soon enough if it actually is right. There's no place like home, and I am not Dorothy. There's no place like home, and I am not Dorothy. There's no place like home, and I am not Dorothy. There's no place like home, and I am not Dennis. Dennis is me. There's no place like home, and I am not Dennis. Dennis is me. There's no place like home, and I am not Dennis. Dennis is me. And that needs to be okay, because if that is not okay, then you tell me first. And if you're going to say that's not okay, then that's not okay with me either. And if you are okay with that, then that is okay with me.